Hello number ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and after great request, we are back with Oversimplified Second Punic War Part 2. Where are my headphones? Where are my headphones? Hit me with Incogni, let's go.
This video was made possible by Incogni.
Let's go.
Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy.
I think that took them like at least 16 days to go through the Alps, if I recall correctly. Or Livy, tell us that. All right, let's have a look at these soldiers. Interesting. I do have something to say about the panoply, the armor, the weapons, the helmets, everything in fact. But I want to let the video play a little bit before I do that. But today, I'm going to be particularly pedantic, not in a bad way though, when it comes to the armor and weapons.
With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy, and Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil.
Right.
Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners, with the winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that the whole thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win. What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win. And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I've soiled myself in all this excitement? No, that's not part of the metaphor. Okay. Hannibal also
Okay, so I got already something to say. So before we talk about armor and weapons, let's discuss these prizes. All right, so the prizes are absolutely correct. They are spot on when it comes to this. One of the ways he and his father Hamilcar ensured that they would get a certain level of stability in the army was through promises of prizes. Because do remember that we're coming from the previous Punic War and all of the problems with the mercenary wars, right? So there was a lot of problem when it comes to instability, loyalty in the army, and so promising them something was absolutely a strategy that both Hannibal and Hamilcar utilized. Now, these prizes usually in this specific context would be land allotment. So you win for me, we conquer Italy, we destroy Rome, and then I will give to each and every single one of you a piece of land that is farmable. Okay, so they can all become now proprietors, landowners. Apart from booty and all the rest will be normal, but this was the most important prize that was promised to these troops.
Okay. Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration. Scipio, on the other hand, now arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them men.
I just love the horses.
Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world. This will be easy, like 10,000 horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby. A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and a... Help me out here, Ralph.
Baby?
A baby, sir? Yes, that's it. A baby. The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy. So, if everybody's ready, on my mark...
I love that he's standing on the horse. And they get destroyed.
The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed lightning-fast Numidian cavalry, a key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics.
Right.
In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son, Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall.
Oh no.
Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs. It was humiliating. And
I love that they have to write it. This is humiliating.
Know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped. Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like? Oh, I know.
And they're gonna cut their heads off.
Hey, Hannibal.
Yeah.
We want to join your side, and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please. Oh, please be Roman heads. How did you know? Running away.
All right, let's get down to business. Otherwise, I get too involved and I say nothing, and then this becomes one of those bad React videos. Now, this is going to be very transformative in nature. Okay, let's talk about the equipment that we have seen so far, and I have a lot to say. All right, let's begin with the weapons. So in this battle scene, we see that the Romans are using gladi, okay, this is a gladius, and the Carthaginians are using what appears to be a type of coppice. Let's begin with the swords, and then we talk about the helmets. Now, believe it or not, I know this is going to sound really strange, but in reality, if we want this to be historically accurate, the weapons should be swapped. Dun dun dun, plot twist, I guess. At this time, the Romans were not using gladi. It's too soon for this. So when it comes to the swords, at this time, the Roman army would be using three. Either the xiphos, which we see now on screen, a sword that usually is considered to be a Greek origin, but I think will be more correctly identified as of Mediterranean origin. The coppice, a sword of Balkan origin that was very common and used by the Greeks, used by the Etruscans, used by the Carthaginians, the Sabines. In this specific time, however, during the Second Punic War, we should probably see it and imagine it mostly in the context of cavalry. And then the Laten B, which is a sword of Celtic origin, perfect representation of Roman cosmopolitanism. This is a Celtic sword made by a blacksmith with a Sabine name and an Etruscan cognomen, with Latin written on the blade and decorated with Macedonian symbols. Made in Rome. When do the Romans start getting gladi? They copy them from the Carthaginians. Celtic tribes of the Iberian Peninsula make the sword, pretty much the predecessor of the gladius. The Carthaginians give it to the troops. Some would have still had some copies, but in general, the Carthaginians are now using this sword of Spanish origin. And at this time, instead, the Romans are still using xiphos and copies, but then they will copy them. When do they copy them? When Scipio Africanus takes the Iberian capital of Cartagena. So this still hasn't happened here. And that happens because they managed to capture over 2,000 smiths from that location. And so they tell them, all right, you are our slaves now, but we will treat you nicely if you produce these swords for us. In fact, what is the name of the first type of gladius used by the Romans? Gladius hispaniensis. So the Romans shouldn't have these swords. Now let's talk about the helmets. When it comes to the helmets here, we see that both sides are using the Montefortino helmet, which is this helmet here. And that is absolutely correct. But of course, the Romans didn't call it like that. And we do know what the Romans called this helmet. And it's with the Latin term conum, which means cone. We find that information in La Lingua Latina. Interestingly enough, however, on the Carthaginian side, at least when it comes to the contingents that would have been of Celtic origin, so those conscript that came specifically from the Iberian Peninsula, they should not have the cheek plates. So at least a section of these soldiers shouldn't have it. When it comes to the plumes that you see the Romans are wearing here, the Carthaginians should also be wearing them. This is a Roman Montefortino helmet, and as you can see, it's got 3 feathers. And here is another example. These are already from the First Punic War, by the way. So by this time, absolutely we should see this. And in fact, we are told by Roman sources that the Romans start wearing 3 plumes, and these are either red or black. So red is fine. Now let's talk about the shields. Now when it comes to the shields, you'll notice that the Roman soldiers here, apart from the gladius that they shouldn't have, they have these shields that have a wooden umbo, so the shield boss. That is correct because at this point in time the Romans did not have developed yet the metal umbo or the metal boss, but the Carthaginians did. So that's another thing that the Romans copied from them. And the fact that the Carthaginians don't have a metal umbo here is a little problematic from the perspective of historical accuracy. Last but not least, you see this late Republican shield, and for what I can see, I'll have to see if I can find a closer image, but it appears that they did go with a metal umbo here, which would be once again incorrect and inaccurate. Yeah, I can see here, yeah, they went for the metal. This is a later invention that, as I say, they copy from the Carthaginians, so this should not be here just yet. Clearly, these are the type of shields that they used to represent the Romans, but then again, these versions would be anachronistic at this time. An earlier variation would be this, which only had a wooden spina, so this spine, and umbo, both being wooden. Most likely the rim in this case would have been rawhide. Alright, so the helmet that we see the Carthaginian soldiers wearing now is a Phrygian helmet. This has been attested in all sorts of iconography since ancient times in the context of the Carthaginians, so it's fine for the soldiers to wear this. In fact, we even have archaeological findings after the Battle of the Egadi Islands, but they could also be wearing some bronze pilos, this helmet of conical shape. So Montefortino, pilos, and Phrygian can all be represented within the Carthaginian army. And all of this information I base on both Titus Livy, Polybius, and, what we can see now on screen, the Sudae lexicon. But I've been pedantic enough for now, let's continue.
Found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed lightning-fast Numidian cavalry, a key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics. In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some, his area, destroying the bridge behind their tail between their legs. It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side, just as he'd hoped. Even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like? Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal. We want to join your side and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please. Oh, please be Roman heads. How did you know? Running away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, now that's embarrassing. Ticinus had been a relatively small battle, but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of.
Yep.
Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory. The Senate was full of excuses. It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry battle. Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions. And our consul was bold. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants.
How about me? Am I fully follicle to you?
That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta.
Yeah.
But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy?
Oh, Hannibal 1, Rome 0.
I'm being ordered home? But I was gonna be the big boy. I was gonna invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home. No! Does somebody need a nap, sir? No! No!
He's pitching a fit.
No! And so Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army.
Absolutely, and then they swap day by day.
But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page. Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen, we can't just march straight at him like we normally do. We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry,
Yep.
I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey, I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming. Just you wait. Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man. Scipio was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirly. So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place. They would each take turns being the one in charge. Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next. Back and forth, back and forth. As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well. In this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal.
Yeah.
Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He
They're playing Monopoly, are they?
fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature.
Yeah.
And he knew he could exploit it. For goodness sake! What's wrong, sir? I'm trying to order some pizza, but I keep getting fed all these personalized ads about being a
Oh, I
hothead.
see. That's a sponsor.
Roman heads, a double consular army, and a hothead. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts, and so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, so he carefully crafted a clever trap, and he made sure to spring it while Longus was still in charge. The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for
Yeah,
light.
and then the loss of the skipping breakfast because the Romans weren't fed and all that stuff, which actually Scipio Africanus will then use against them. Because again, the Romans are great at learning from their enemy.
Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans.
Yay!
Good night, boys. Dream of revenge.
Oh my god.
Gorzog, send out the cavalry. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp, arriving just before dawn. Hey, Romans! Wakey, wakey! What the? What's going on? Hey, Longus, your butt smells like a butt. It does not! Scipio, awaken the troops. Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out. Well, it's working. Send out the troops. Longus, it's clearly a trap. And I'm falling for it. Send out the troops. Hey, guys, wake up. You're heading out for battle. What?
Oh, they sleep with the helmets on and the Lorica Hamata.
But we haven't had breakfast. We're skipping breakfast.
Oh no.
I don't think you can do that. As the Romans hurried out of camp, the Numidians began luring them back to the
love the music.
Carthaginian camp, where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber. Eat up, boys. We're having pancakes. While the Carthaginians were enjoying their hearty breakfast, the starving Romans were still on their way. Hurry up! We have to catch those Numidians. Hey, why have you stopped marching? Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us. Well, get your gluteus maximus in the
Gluteus
water!
Maximus.
All right, boys, time to lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender. There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men.
I love the sign. Carthaginian camp. The arrow pointing down.
I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over. I can't move. Oh, I'm sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends? Welcome to the real world! Truth. Who do you like?
That's what they're doing.
Sharon. Hey, look guys. The Romans are here.
I love the face
Having
of the
perfectly
consul.
orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men were well rested and covered in oil. When the
Massive factor.
two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And the cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush. They suddenly sprung out, encircling the exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces. Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans. But the key word at Trebia was control. Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully control the conditions of battle
One thing I want to say again about the army.
and the environment of the battlefield to
Here we
carefully
go. So you will notice that once again, this is an oversimplified version, so it's okay, and it's not an attack. But I'm saying, look at the army led by Hannibal. You'll notice that they are all copy-paste soldiers. The reality is that his army, when we are describing Carthaginian armies specifically during the Second Punic War, they should be divided into 3 different type of troops that should be visually recognizable. So if anyone asked me, not that they have to, but I'm saying they did, I would tell them you have to make them distinct into 3 different ways. Because what you had is One of the main characteristics of difference between the Carthaginian army of the Second Punic War and the Carthaginian army of the end of the First Punic War was the fact that for about 100 years, the Carthaginians had a lot of mercenary troops. They also had, which is generally speaking a result of the devastating defeat that they had suffered at the Battle of Crimisus. So for about 100 years, as I was saying, between 341 BC and 241 BC, they start to rely heavily on mercenaries, because during that battle, at that time, they did have a fully citizen troop, but they were all butchered and cut to pieces. Many of them would have been nobles as well, so upper class. It was devastating for the Carthaginians. And this we know thanks to Plutarch, who tells us about the battle. However, towards the end of the First Punic War, we have a progressive return to a properly Carthaginian army. So by this time, also thanks to some of the reforms advanced by Hamilcar, so Hannibal's Barca's father, the army would have been split into three different categories. You had Carthaginian soldiers, which were one of the main cores of the army. These are either citizens or half-citizens, but they are actual heavy infantry, differently from how it had been before, where the only citizen troops would have been used either in the navy or as officers. Then you would have the second type of troop, which is the conscripts coming from mostly Libyan and Libo-Phoenician colonies, towns that had been subjugated by Carthage. They were under Carthage control, but they were not citizen troops. Last but not least, some would have still been mercenaries at the time.
Fully control the conditions of battle, creating lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way to success. And concealing troops for an ambush? All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus, he managed to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops. Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome. Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath? Yes. Longus, what's under that rug?
Oh no.
Aurora Borealis? Aurora Borealis? Oh, well, that's my consulship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye. Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans. And as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul. In Rome, complacency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus's terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius.
Ooh, Flaminius is gonna be bad news for Rome. He looks awesome though. That face.
The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy. The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage. Now their plans lay in ruins, and they were levying 11 new legions to deal with the threat. Hannibal had completely redefined the war. But Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance.
The Celts shouldn't, continental Celts at this time should not have the blue tattoos. This would have been something that was belonging to the ancestral Celtic culture. I'm talking 5th, 6th century BC, really old school. But by this time, it would have been gone. Whether it be tattoos or whether it be body paints, we can discuss the Latin terms. The Latins, when they describe this, first of all, they use two different colors. Either they call it as blue or they call it green. We don't know. But also they mention it, they use the same term that they usually use for permanent dyeing of clothes. So anyways, these at this time would have been present in the Britons in Britannia, but not in continental Celts. Love the hairstyle though, and the moustache.
To ensure he maintained their alliance and his base of support in Italy.
Yeah.
Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beard trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become.
Unforgivable.
They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty. And Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south to his side. So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. just one problem. There were two main routes Hannibal could
Right.
take to move south. And wouldn't
And then the marshes.
you know it, that's exactly where the two new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal tried to move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in. There is a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that, right? That'd be crazy, right? Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day
Hannibal?
trek across the Arno marshlands was hell on earth.
Hannibal's elephant, by the way, just as an interesting piece of information, most likely was of Indian origin, his personal elephant, whereas the rest of the elephants that he carried for war were North African.
Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps. Imagine 3 full days, unable to sit or lie down, because there's nowhere to sit or lie down, meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud. You contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, "Man, I could just sink into that." And then they would. When pack animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments, before they were whipped back into line. Even Hannibal himself couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? I need to take a leak.
Yeah. He lost his eye. He did lose his eye.
Jeez, Hannibal. Looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see, water everywhere, but it's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself. That'll be $3,000. When the now possibly one-eyed Hannibal
Or are
and
they
his army
Americans?
emerged from the swamp, they were shattered. But he had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands, where he could replenish his supplies, and his Celt allies could go crazy, securing Roman loot and booty. As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice. The hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands, rather than waiting for his co-consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character. He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society, and as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the establishment, and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius.
Sure,
And
I'll take
Hannibal, thanks to his spies, knew everything. Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap. Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it. I've spotted the enemy. Sir? That big follow us sign seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth, and I'm taking the bait.
I love that they're both, all the officers and consuls and the upper commanding echelon of the army are wearing lorica muscolata, which makes...
This really seems like a trap. Yes, Gareth, and I'm falling for it.
I would have
Daylight was
decorated it
fading.
more.
So for now, the Romans set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome. Right. For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius.
I love the
Good
art
night,
style.
Rome.
In armor.
Good evening, Hannibal.
Uh-oh.
During the night, Hannibal ordered total stealth.
That's fantastic.
As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass, completely undetected by Rome's scouts. Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this! This is perfect! The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming. Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us? You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap? The Romans found themselves completely hemmed in on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned.
Heavy armor is, but yeah.
And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance. In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed and an equal number captured. An entire army completely wiped out, along with their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies. Worse yet, when the other consuls...
Man, they did a fantastic job with this, I'd like to say. Regardless of whatever nitpick or whatever thing I'm saying when it comes to the accuracy of the representation, I'm just doing that because it's interesting. And once again, it's not an attack, it's oversimplified. With that being said, I think they did a fantastic job when it comes to storytelling and animation.
Sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions. They too were caught and defeated. A double disaster.
The faces.
Rome went into a frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome. To this point,
he didn't have the resources to siege and take Rome, though, and that was one of a problem with the inner political struggles, both with the original capital of Carthage and the capital of the colonies in Spain. I think if they had had a much better unity and they would have kept sending reinforcements, maybe could have attempted.
He had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis.
Yep.
And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator. It's actually where we get the word. But unlike...
It's different, of course, from a modern, 20th century dictator, but I'll let him explain.
Modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up. And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus. So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long-term, and he could only remain there for so long. So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger. And so Fabius presented his new idea to the Roman Senate. Okay guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away. Fabius's strategy couldn't have been any less Roman. Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it. It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular. At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a
the blue territory, Lucania, there is something I want to tell you about it later, and it's really, really interesting. I'll keep it for later, I promise I won't forget. It has to do with the Carthaginian army and about something that I don't think you know, unless you're really into Roman history. Let's go.
Calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell.
MacDonald.
Old MacDonald had a farm.
Poor MacDonald.
Shut up. But you know who else hated Fabius's strategy? Hannibal.
Yeah.
He understood the danger he was in. Turning Rome's allies against her required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle.
Yep.
He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey, Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm? You got some sort of a secret deal with him? What? Of course not. Hey, Hannibal!
What?
Burn my farm too, please!
What?
Burn my farm too, please!
No! Remember our secret
Oh,
deal!
no. Uh-oh.
Well, you got to admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy, great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies. But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes. Haha! We've got him! After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir?
I wonder if in this one they're going to show the counterattack in Spain. But, I hope so. I know there is a part 3. I imagine the part 3 is the one with the Battle of Zama, of course, but I wonder if that also contains the section about Spain. We'll see.
What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one.
And we're falling for it!
Suspecting a trap, Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with torches tied to their heads. They then found themselves caught in an ambush.
An interesting fun fact again. The Romans, they didn't have a name for elephants. They had seen elephants before, by the way, because sometimes I hear people saying, oh, when the Romans saw the elephants or the Carthaginians, they had never seen one before. That's incorrect. They did see them before this, but they didn't have a word for them, and so they actually called them a type of bull. I just wanted to, or ox. I wanted to say that because of, it just reminded me of that fun fact.
With the Romans distracted, Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed.
Yep.
Classic Hannibal. For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius the Delayer. But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done.
Yep.
He was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry, and the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position. Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea. To this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy. But when Fabius's term finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it.
We're going to get to Cannes now.
Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky, or, if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it! Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush. Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this
Up a
point,
tree.
I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey. Look, this time we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be helped.
Without
It's in our
thinking.
blood.
Well, come on.
But I have a proposition.
Let's see.
This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army.
It
I'm
is
talking
kinda-
like 80,000 men. It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls. He can hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men.
If you think about it, I mean, yes, I mean, in retrospect, now we can analyze and discuss tactically, strategically, why this happened, that happened, make a comprehensive analysis and whatever you want. But it made sense. I mean, if I was a Roman at the time, I probably would have thought 80k they had. I mean, that's a massive army. There's no way.
Grow up! You know what I mean? And so it was. With 2 new consuls, Rome put together a massive army, the
Paulus
biggest Rome had ever
Eduardo.
fielded, to put Hannibal away once and
Man.
for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder? As this massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC, the Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign.
I'm so looking forward to the Battle of Cannae. I'm so looking forward to see how they represented it.
And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight it on his terms. But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That army's huge! There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men? You know what I mean. I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco. This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like, hey, they're laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle. Yippee! As for the Romans, the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt.
Sure.
On his day
Nice context. Nice context. I mean, this is a cartoon channel. Rather than blue, I would have gone for black here.
command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle. And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same.
Look at that.
And here comes the single largest battle of the Second Punic War, and one of the most renowned battles in history.
Very
The
infamous.
infamous
Yeah.
Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans. Like I said,
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2-1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line
Fantastic animations.
like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry
Do the
from being able
enveloping,
to
yeah.
outmaneuver them. They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength, rather than trickery, would decide the outcome. If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it.
Yeah, you can see the Celtic contingents here. I would have given them the Carthaginians as well. Kind of very similar oblong center-gripped shields. They should have those too.
He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry,
Yep.
waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle. But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass, trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize.
And that's because it's not like now we're looking at this and be like, oh, but that's stupid, they're getting an envelope. But normally that's when you gain most of your kills during a battle, is when they rout. So as they start running away, they turn their backs, that's when you pursue and butcher them. So what they're doing here usually works, probably for a problem of miscommunication because of what that consul did running away. They didn't know that that had happened, and so that the cavalry would have arrived.
That they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back.
Also because they were very similarly equipped. That's an important section that I did mention at the very beginning, sort of. But they were very similarly equipped. Really, you just need to put the freaking plumes up.
Into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you. A military general's wet dream. The total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. And with that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves. The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or...
But yeah, they got butchered like that. And at first I actually struggled to believe it, but then we reviewed the data and it's... In this case, it's probably not an exaggeration.
Captured. Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal. Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Paulus, for one, but also 80 senators and more. It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population, aged 18 to 50, died at Cannae. This was it. Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy.
Absolutely.
Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow. Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next. Rome surrenders.
And they
Their
don't.
territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again.
I mean, it could have happened. I think the moment when Hannibal loses the war before Zama, because Zama is like the final event that marks the end, of course, but the causal link was the loss of Spain. That's why I was looking forward. It's probably the next video, which I believe they just published, so we're totally watching that together. But it's when he loses Spain I think that's the moment when he loses the war.
But sir, what if they don't surrender? Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender.
Not the Romans.
Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind. But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them.
Yep.
And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders.
Absolutely.
At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need. That officer was Scipio the Younger. But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus, the hero of Rome.
Whoa. Man, what a fantastic, phenomenal, guys. You were amazing. Loved it. So I'm looking forward to watch part 3. Of course, I will make a reaction. If you noble ones want me to, do leave the comments down below. Not in my description, please, but do leave the comments down below, because I would love for this video to get good views, so then we can do part 3. And as I say, there is a lot to say about the conquest on Spain. There is a lot to say about Zama. There is a lot to say about elephants, but I did make a promise. What the heck happens in Lucania? Lucania is where the Romans will eventually, after the Second Punic War ends, the Romans will recruit elephants and put them into their armies. Mind-blowing, right? So often when we think of elephants, we never think of the Romans. We think of the elephants were used by the enemies of Rome, like the Carthaginians. But no, sir. After they do defeat them, they start deploying elephants in a military context as well. And that's the region where they get them from, as they get them imported and all that. So that was a little fun fact that I wanted to share. But there will be a lot more to say when it comes to Hannibal and the Battle of Zama. I have a lot to say on the Battle of Zama as well. So fantastic job again, Oversimplified. Wonderful work. Let's give him a like. And thank you so much, noble ones, for watching. I know you appreciate these reacts. I try to make them as transformative as possible, adding as much information as I can. But then again, sometimes it's difficult because I get so caught up that I forget that the camera is on. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow for my next daily upload. Bye.